Hello. It is time for another costume. The New York Historical Costumer Society is having a Gilded Age themed event in February 22nd, 2025. I am filming this. Let me look at my watch. I think today is the 4th of January. And this is an evening wear event, and I've known about it for months. And I have been telling myself I'm not going to leave it till the last minute. And here I am. Again. Before I start constructing the video, and I am filming this intro before I actually start to work on the gown, so make of that what you will, I want to actually tell you a little bit about it. I have been in love with the 1890s ever since I first made a walk-in suit, and I loved that silhouette. And the time period for this event is 1870s to, I believe, like 1905. But I knew pretty much right away that I actually wanted to make 1890s because I didn't want to start having to work completely from foundations out. So if I was going to make, say, 1880s, second bustle era, which was my other option, I would have to make a bustle. And for the 1890s, I have basically most of what I need. I did have to make an extra petticoat, which I made out of cotton organdy, but I had everything else. So it was really just the skirt, the bodice, and because it is February and we do live in New York, I have to make some kind of coat, but that is for another video. That's for another time. So with the time period decided, it was about looking for inspiration in terms of design and in terms of what I could realistically achieve with my skills. And I came across this fashion plate in one of Christina Harris's books that I've talked about before. I'll leave a link here somewhere. Is it on this side? Is it on this side? I can't remember. But I'll leave a link to the books. But this particular fashion plate is from 1894, and it is from The Voice of Fashion, which is where Christina Harris's patterns for these books come from. And a lot of the skirts for this time period are very similar. And what really changes is the bodice and the sleeves, of course. And in 1894, we still don't really have, or at least this particular design that I was attracted to, doesn't have those enormous leg of mutton sleeves. It's actually quite tame, relatively speaking. So basically a few things had to come together for me to make a design achievable. Like I said, it had to be within the realm of possibility for my skill, and it had to be with a pattern that would be commercially available. So this gown, this 1894 gown, met all of that, and I already had patterns that would work for both the bodice and the skirt. And because of course you got out a little bit of complexity in there, I decided that I wanted to embroider the skirt with the design on the House of Worth gown that is colloquially known as the wheat gown, that has with sheaths basically along the seams, on the two front side seams and the back and whatnot. And there is, thankfully, a design for this, an embroidery file for this. So I purchased that. And I think embroidering my skirt is going to be the biggest challenge of this entire process. But speaking of the patterns, for the skirt, I am using the Truly Victorian 292 bell skirt. And the shape of the skirts, as far as I can tell from the illustrations, both for the pattern and for the inspiration gown on the Christina Harris books, is pretty much the same. And I do want to say that the Christina Harris book is a drafting manual, but why draft when somebody has already drafted for me? And for the bodice, I am using another Truly Victorian pattern. It is 492, but I am changing the sleeves for ones in the Truly Victorian sleeve patterns, which is I think 495, because I want to make the sleeves sheer a little bit different. And then for the neckline, I am going to do also sheer fabric like in the inspiration gown. Now I have already experienced some logistical glitches, some logistical problems One of them being that the side pattern piece for the skirt and the back pattern piece are enormous. They do not fit on my cutting table, which is a decent size. And so I had to trace the pattern on my floor, which means I am also going to have to cut the pattern pieces from the fabric on the floor. And with this intro out of the way, let's actually get started on making this thing and see how it goes. I had 8 yards of this fabric, so the first thing I had to do was tear it into manageable pieces, and tearing it like this is my favorite way to cut fabric. Then I started cutting my pattern pieces. This is the center front, and then you are going to see me on the floor cutting the side pieces. My knees have not recovered. I got wipes and I got some knee pads to cut the back, and then I serged the raw edges before constructing the front and the side panels, getting it ready to embroider. And because I'm not a total idiot, I decided to go ahead and do a test swatch for my embroidery. So I took a piece of fabric and I put a seam in it, just like my final embroidery is going to have, and put some stabilizer on the back and decided to embroider. And I'm glad that I did this because I discovered that my metallic thread, which is the thread I'm going to be using or that I wanted to use, kept breaking. And I tried, different kinds of needles, and I tried lowering the tension on my sewing machine and nothing worked. And so I thought I would try a different thread to see if that made any difference. And it does. It is in fact the metallic thread that's a problem, because as you can see here, this is running perfectly on regular embroidery thread, which is made from rayon. And this is a real bummer because I really wanted this embroidery to be metallic, but alas, maybe it's not meant to be. But what this means is that I have 6 rolls of metallic gold thread that I can't use, and I have to find embroidery thread that goes well with this fabric. Obviously, this cream is just testing. This is not actually going to work. Getting ready to do the embroidery is the same as I would do for any other project. The first thing that I did was to put the stabilizer on the hoop, and I'm doing the stabilizer on the hoop rather than the stabilizer on the fabric because, as you can see, in a little while I am not actually going to hoop the fabric. So I'm putting my stabilizer in my hoop, then I spray the stabilizer with a tacky spray, and then I float my fabric on top. Because when I did my test, I could not iron out the crease that the hoop left in the fabric when I actually put the fabric in the hoop, and I didn't want that for my final garment. So I did this technique called floating. And to float, basically you just put the stabilizer on the hoop like I did here, and then you put the fabric on top and make sure that it is there's no bubbles on it when it goes on the stabilizer. Make sure that everything is centered as you want it, and then you pin it in place in sections where your needle from your machine is not going to hit, so outside the actual embroidery field, and that way everything is secured but you're not crushing your fabric with the hoop. And then it was time to embroider, and it was terrifying. So to make sure things didn't move, I did this basting around what would be the embroidery field, and I got to work. And watching the machine do the embroidery over the seam was like heart-stopping. Thankfully, it all went without a hitch, and I ended up finding a thread that was golden color, but it's not metallic, and I think it works very well with this tone of fabric. Okay, so the first section of the design is off the machine, and I have to say that I am very pleased with the stitch out. It may not be exactly the color that I wanted it to be, in that it's slightly, it's gold, but more yellow. It's not the actual metallic sort of tone that I wanted. But anyway, you gotta make do with what you have. And wow, this looks purple, but it's actually red. But yes, the stitch out looks really good. My hand is not that blue, it's just the color balance. And very happy with how it turned out. These are marks to match the other design. And the back also looks pretty great. Now the next step is to just take the clips off, take the stabilizer off, and then align it to make the second part of the design. Aligning the separate sections of the design to make it look like one seamless design is what I was most worried about, and it's why I made the skirt, well, the whole gown, out of polyester Mikado instead of the original silk I wanted to use, because silk is very expensive and I felt like there was a high probability that I would screw up the embroidery, and it's a lot easier to eat the cost when you're paying, say, $18 or $19 a yard versus $50 a yard. And I was really worried about this step, but it actually turned out to be very easy because I recently bought an upgrade for my sewing machine to include some new embroidery features that it was not in my machine originally, or rather that were not in my machine originally. And there's something called pinpoint placement, and it made all the difference. I have aligned designs like this before and it's always a little bit wonky, but this one is 100% perfect in every alignment point. And if you have a Bernina and you have the option to have pinpoint placement, do yourself a favor and get it. And so here I am using the paper template only to make sure that the design is going to fit within the embroidery area of the hoop and not necessarily to actually align the first design with the second design. And yes, I'm so in awe of how easy this was, and if I had known then what I know now, I would have gone with the silk from the beginning. Okay, I have done everything that I can to line this up. I used pinpoint placement on my embroidery machine, and I have aligned the marks for the old design and the new one. So from here on, it's really a matter of trusting the process. And I guess we will see if it works. So let's start. Let's start slow. Okay, so that one aligned perfectly. And this one also aligned very, very well. So I think we are good to go. Now the trick is going to be babysitting all this extra fabric so that it doesn't get caught in the design. The second part of the design is finished. Here's the first one, and it is actually pretty great. Like this one here, the match point is perfect. These two are not 100% there, but honestly, the difference is so small that from a distance, like when people will actually be looking at my gown, you can't tell. So I can definitely live with that. And now I have to do this, how many more times? So there's 2 more pieces to go here, and then the same on the other side, so a whole bunch of times. And it takes about 45 minutes to 50 minutes for each hooping, so it's gonna be a while. The first side is done more or less without issues. I know this looks ripply here, but it's because I have not removed the paper from the back, and then I'm gonna have to give it a good press. But I am actually very happy with how this turned out. It did threaten to go a little bit off center every now and then, but I managed to rescue it. And it has not taken as long as I thought that it would take. So I think I should be finished with the other side by tomorrow if I, actually work on this. And this is, as I say, there's still the paper in the back, but like also this just needs a little good press and we are good to go. But even in the original, you can see some rippling where the embroidery is. The skirt is done embroidering and I'm very happy with how it turned out. And now the time has arrived for me to decide what to do about the back of my dress. The dress is designed so the pattern that I have is designed with 2 lengths of train, one shorter and one longer. And aesthetically speaking, I would love to have a long train, but I do have concerns about walking around with a train in New York City streets. I'm getting to this event on the subway, and that is not because I don't want to spend the money on an Uber, but it's actually because when I'm corseted or in stays, I find it very uncomfortable to sit in a car for really any period of time. And so walking, standing up is the most comfortable way for me to walk around in costume. And so that's one concern is walking around in New York City streets with a train. Concern number two is that this is in February, so chances are that it might snow or it might be wet, which makes the walking on the streets even worse. I have been thinking about what to do about the back of the dress, and I have the pattern piece here, which I haven't yet cut out from the paper, so you probably won't be able to see it, but it's huge. And I think I am going to brave the longer train and then trying to figure out some way to like hold it up while I walk so that I can have a clean dress and also a train. Now the pattern piece is too big for me to cut on the table, so this means that I have to go back crawling on the floor again. This time, however, I have knee pads because my knees took a long time to recover from cutting the sides of this skirt. So I'm gonna cut the pattern pieces from fabric and get to the next step of construction. One of the things that you should always do when working with a pattern is measure the seams that are supposed to match to see if they actually do match. So this is the side seam for the skirt. The side, yeah, I guess the side is on top, the back is at the bottom, and that is like more or less where you match it for a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so that's fine. The notches here lined up, and then you get to the hem, and they do not match. There is like a 3/4 of an inch difference between what is the center back in the train and the side seam, and that is kind of unacceptable. So what I'm gonna have to do is match or mark where it ends and then sort of work that difference into the back, so it has to be shaped a little bit differently. And I have worked with other truly Victorian patterns before and the instructions have been fine. I have found that for this particular skirt, the instructions have not been great. It doesn't help that it is a bit of a weird shape because the center back seam is split into, well, 4 pieces, left and right, but it's split between what makes the train and then what makes the sides. And so diagrams for construction would actually have been very helpful here. And there are very few diagrams in these instructions, very few. I'm pressing the seams on the side of the skirt, and I just want to show you something really quick because it's kind of important sometimes when you're working with these kinds of fabric. If I press the fabric and I hold the iron down, the seam allowance is actually going to mark on this side of the fabric and it's going to show through. And otherwise, this fabric is also kind of difficult to press. It doesn't really take a crease too well. So a trick is to use a seam roll, which I have down here, just for padding so you're not too rough on your seam, and a clapper. And what I'm gonna do is just barely touch the fabric with the iron, and there is steam coming out. And then I'm going to just rest the clapper on top of the seam. I'm not doing anything else. I'm not pressing on it. I'm not holding it down. I'm just gonna let it do its thing. And just a few seconds, it cools and you have a flatter seam. One more time, look at the seam is standing up, right? So I'm gonna take my iron, very gently, just sort of hover it. I'm not actually pushing down. Take my clapper, rest it on there for a few seconds, let it do its thing. Look at the difference. And then on the other side, it's just flat and there are no marks for the seam allowance. Unfortunately, the skirt is at the point where it's so big that I can't actually show you the whole thing in one shot, but this is the center back seam. I have it folded here. So this is the waist, and then this here is the piece that makes the train. And so this is the final seam to complete the skirt. And what has to happen is that obviously this seam has to match. So I'm going to go ahead and pin it, and I am going to match the seams here. And as I said, this is the waist, and so this here, it goes over your butt. And this is the part that has to be left open so that you can take the skirt on and off, about 7 inches. So I am going to match the raw edges and pin it, but I'm actually going to start sewing the center back seam about here. So about 7 inches down. And then of course match the train part, which should match because they have notches here to make it easier to match them. And they were cut at the same time, so they are exactly the same size. So now I'm gonna take it to the sewing machine and just sew the seam here, as I said, to about this pin here. This pattern didn't include a facing for the opening at the center back where you would have seen my underwear if my skirt moved around at all. So to avoid that, what I did was draft my own facing, and then after I sewed the center back seam, I attached the facing on the inside to the opening, and that was before I added the waistband. Doing the waistband was fine until I got to the very back, where I had to either do the pleats or gather the fabric to fit the waistband. And unfortunately, these patterns don't have markings for pleats or anything. It really just says gather skirt to fit waistband and gives you sort of the dimensions in the back where it needs to be gathered. So I tried actually gathering with thread, but my fabric was just too thick and stiff for that. And after a lot of trial and error, I managed to actually get pleats that looked somewhat similar on either side of the center back opening. It's not 100% perfect, but it's close enough. And you know, it's really a shame that there's no more instruction for doing this, but you know, what are you gonna do? After I attached the outside of the waistband to the skirt, I went ahead and I added 2 hanging loops, and they are made from just seam tape, and the hanging loops are sewn in there obviously to hang this for storage. And then I just turned the waistband to the inside and went ahead and finished it by hand so that it's not visible from the outside. Then I sewed 2 hooks and bars for closure, and this is what the back of the waistband looks like with the pleats and the closures and everything finished. Time to hem the skirt has come, and the pattern has you use stiff fabric, but because I don't have a lining underneath my skirt, underneath the fashion fabric, I'm actually using synthetic horsehair braid. And this is 2 inches wide, and it is the stiff variety. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew it to the outside, then turn it in. And thankfully, horsehair braid has this little string that you can pull so that you can make the top of the braid smaller to accommodate the circles of things like, you know, circle skirts. So that will make hemming it easier. It does mean that once I sew the braid to the skirt and fold it in, I do have to hand attach the top of the hem to the skirt, not just because of the braid, but because it will look better from the outside. I will have some stitching show through, and honestly, I'm fine with that. If you look at some of the extant gowns, you can see that there is that line at the top where the skirt facing or the stiffening has been stitched. In some is more obvious than others, and obviously if you have a lining, you can try to stitch only to the lining, but this will be fine. Okay, so I have hemmed the skirt, and I am wearing it with all of the undergarments that I initially planned on wearing. So I'm wearing obviously my shift, which you can't really see here, my corset, I have hips, so like hip padding, and then I have 2 petticoats. And as you can see, even though I hemmed very little, it is quite short, and especially like at the sides. And I'm thinking, well, I mean, this is wearable, like I can just wear it like this, but I'm thinking that maybe if I take the hip padding off, it will help with the length a little bit. And also, even though I tried to put my hip pad below my waist like considerably, I can see that the skirt is like bunching up here from the bump of the hip pad. So I'm gonna try removing it and see how I like the silhouette, because like the skirt is not changing. I'm not making this skirt again. So all I can do at this point is figure out ways to make it better by basically adjusting what I have underneath. So I'm gonna take the hip, like look at it now. And I actually do love how it looks in the back. The skirt, the train is kind of a mess. But you know, it is bunching here from the bulk underneath, and it is quite short. So yeah, let's take it off and see what it looks like. Okay, so I have taken the hip pad off, and let me show you what my hip pad looks like. This is basically what it looks like in there. And I have worn it before with other skirts, but I don't actually think it's gonna work with this one. And while not having the hip pad does diminish the silhouette a little bit, I actually don't think it's bad. I think it looks fine, and I would absolutely wear this. I do still think it's a little short, but not as short as it was, especially at the sides. At the sides it's much more even, and there's nothing I can do about the length of the skirt as it is. So there's two things that can happen at this point. I can either leave it as is and just, you know, deal, or I can add a ruffle to the skirt. The ruffle, obviously at the bottom, can either go from the front to the sides to like right where the train starts and then end there. I have seen that in period fashion plates. So maybe like here at this seam, or I could just have the ruffle go all the way, let me kick the tray now, all the way around the hem. And I think that might be a little better, because even though it will take some more time than just doing the front, it will, because the ruffle will extend below the edge of the skirt now, it will hide the white braid that I use to stiffen my hem. Hindsight is 2020. I should have done things differently, but I gotta work with what I have. So my plan is to think about how to go forward, but I think the ruffle is gonna be the best way to go. And let me see if I can ruffle this train out and show you what it actually looks like when it's not all scrunched up. Right, so this is like the best I can do. Obviously, it's never actually going to look like this because I will be walking around, but it should be close enough, I guess. And another thing that I have learned just from trying this on now is to not walk backwards. I tripped and I almost killed myself. So with a train like this, the trick is to just walk forward, turn around, so you can walk back. Otherwise, you'll end up, you know, on your ass, falling on the floor. Another thing I want to do is, and I talked about this in a previous clip, is figure out how to add a loop to the train so that I can pick it up when I'm walking on the subway. And it has to be added to the inside. I'm thinking, this is a center back seam. I'm thinking I'm gonna put it somewhere around here, so probably like about a foot and a bit in. And obviously when I carry it, it's gonna be inside out, but I'm okay with that. And then I will carry it in my hand. The other side, I'm gonna carry it on my left while I am on the subway. And again, having that ruffle, I think will hide the white braid. When I have been trying this skirt on, I have been looking at myself in a mirror that is set on the floor and slightly angled up. And in that perspective, to me, the skirt looked really, really, really short. But then I went back and I watched the clip that you just saw of me trying this skirt on, and I saw it the way that people are actually going to see me. People are not going to see me from the bottom up. People are going to see me from the top down, especially because I'm short. But even, like most people are going to see me at the level of the camera was seeing me. And from that angle, the dress does not look as short as I thought. And so I do still think it is a bit short and it could do with a little bit of length, but it is not as stark as I thought. So anyway, I have decided that I am not going to add the ruffle because I can put up with the length, and I'd rather not ruin the lines that I had in my mind for this skirt with a ruffle if I don't absolutely have to. So I'm not gonna do the ruffle for length. However, what I cannot live with is the horsehair braid showing. So I went to the garment district and I got this single-faced velvet ribbon that I am going to use to cover the horsehair braid. I did that off camera and then failed to get a video of anything else after that just for the skirt. But here is a quick, crappy video of the skirt without giving too much away of the rest of the outfit, for which you will have to tune in for the next video that will cover the bodice and the outfit as a whole. I will see you then. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.